Our next speaker is Angela Andrews, all the way from Hunterdon County in Flemington. Angela's going to talk a little bit about neurodiversity in a talk called We Are Our Brains. Everybody, Angela, thank you so much.
Hi. And I'm not talking about any of those tonight, so. So I'm going to tell you a story, because who doesn't love bedtime stories, and it's past my bedtime. So once upon a time, there were 3 little kids. The first little kid grew up in the deep woods of Canada. He was an unusual child. He was extremely intelligent, very friendly, but kind of shy and awkward. And oddly, he had no facial expressions, no matter what his emotion was. He was completely fascinated with police dramas, crime investigations, and the supernatural. As he got older, his differences started to become a problem, and the people around him started to mistreat him. So to protect him, his parents picked him up and whisked him away to a tiny little town in the middle of Canada and enrolled him in an even tinier school. And they hid him away there until he was grown. Once he graduated high school, he started working in a comedy club, similar to this one, just to try to make ends meet while he figured out, what to do with his life. He had not really ever been out of Canada, didn't have much experience. In one of the clubs one night, while he was giving his performance, there was someone there from Saturday Night Live. They hired him on the spot. They loved the way that he could give his material without making any facial expressions at all. As he became more famous, those talents of being able to deliver amazing lines with no facial expression at all, and his ability to create characters as if he could see them in front of him as he was describing how they should be in a movie, catapulted him to fame. And he's created some extremely famous characters, such as Dr. Raymond Stantz in the Ghostbusters and Elwood Blues in the Blues Brothers. That man was Dan Aykroyd. The second little boy grew up in sunny California, not far from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. But his life was anything but bright. He was very unusual, and he was a loner. He didn't start speaking till he was older, and then when he did, he spoke very strangely, often just echoing what he'd heard. His parents, rather than being supportive, were embarrassed of him. So they locked him away from the world, even putting plywood over his window so that he couldn't get out and nobody could see in. He was obsessed with things other people found terrifying, which just made him stand out more. He loved graveyards, ghosts, talking of death, hauntings. In fact, when he was allowed out, which was usually in the evening, after everybody had all gone home, he would go to the graveyard down the street from his house and sit and watch the gravediggers work as the sun set behind them. And he would draw and draw. He was obsessed with drawing. One of the projects he did when he was 14 years old for school was found by someone who was a Disney executive. And at 14, Disney started sponsoring this boy. Suddenly, his drawings, that everybody thought were so creepy, became internationally wildly successful. And Disney took a huge risk with him. Disney usually does cheerful things. He focused on the abhorrent, the lonely, the rejected. In fact, he says that the movies that he has either written or illustrated are an autobiography of his soul, especially the movie Edward Scissorhands. He's also done movies like Nightmare Before Christmas or The Corpse Bride. That child was Tim Burton. In a bustling suburb not far from Chicago, the third little child was desperately trying to find her place. She was a very unusual child. In fact, she started speaking before her first birthday. There's a recording of her on her first birthday giving her full name and address, which is very unusual to those who don't have children. By the age of 3, she'd taught herself to read. She had a nearly photographic memory and seemed like she could pick up any instrument and learn to play it by ear just if she wanted to. She was very outgoing, but very socially awkward. In fact, she seemed unable to tell what other people were thinking. Like if somebody were angry at her, she would just go on as if nothing had happened and she hadn't noticed because she hadn't noticed. Her family was not supportive either. She was punished for being different. If she committed a social faux pas, she was locked in her room. If clothes were uncomfortable for her because she had severe sensory problems, she was forced to wear more of them because she needed to learn to just get over it. When it was found that she had an obsession with animals, she was forced to watch as every one of them was killed. When she graduated high school, her family turned their back on her because she refused to be normal. So she went out on her own, got a job at a pharmaceutical company, hated it there. People were very cruel, leaving nasty notes on her desk, bullying her, just making her life miserable because she was different. She took a shot at a job that seemed completely out of, there was no way, and she got it. As soon as everybody found out that she got this amazing job, they suddenly were her best friends. They wanted references, and even threw her a huge going away party. She didn't like parties, so she didn't go, but, that and she didn't really like them either. After she moved far, far away from where she had been living, out to the East Coast. Things started to get better as she moved up in the world, and then one day she was asked to do something completely out of character for her, which was to give a TED Talk on what it's like to be different. That girl was me. So what do the 3 characters in that story have in common? Well, I wish I could say I'm as funny as Dan Aykroyd, or that I could draw like Tim Burton. Believe me, that's not true. What we do have in common is all 3 of us have autism. You may think the symptoms are so different, but that's because out of the core symptoms of autism, there's over 14 million different combinations that can occur in any one person. You will never find 2 people with autism that are the same. The other thing we have in common is none of us were really accepted for who we were until we became who we are. Recently, there's been a huge focus in the world on being your authentic self, being true, accepting others. But what does that really, truly mean to people? To me, there are 2 kinds of acceptance. The first kind is in-the-box acceptance. You'll be accepted if you're only a little bit different, a little quirk, a little difference here and there, and you're fine. Anything beyond that, forget about it. And people who are different, rather than show their difference, they know they're not going to be accepted, so they spend all of their energy trying to fit in and act like everyone else. Why should you care? What does that mean to you? Well, I'm going to use Maslow's pyramid of needs, Maslow being my favorite psychologist ever, to kind of explain. So if you think of a pyramid, at the bottom of the pyramid are the things that every person needs just to survive, which according to my psychology professor, you need food, sex, and an iPad. You got those 3 things, you are good. At the top of the pyramid is where everyone is trying to get. That is self-actualization. And people who reach that can use their talents to change the world. People who live in fear of rejection, who are mistreated, who can't be their authentic selves, can never reach the top of that pyramid. They can never use their talents the way that they were meant to be. Why does that matter? Think of the loss to the world, the loss of new ideas, the loss of cures for diseases, the loss of new art, new music, new movies, all because we can't accept people for who they are. Currently, people with autism are frequently not treated well and not accepted for who they are. It's considered too difficult to deal with. So rather, the focus is on treating, normalizing, finding a cure. But recent studies have shown that the autistic brain is visible in utero at 4 months development. How do you cure that? You can't. But let's say, for a moment, they found a cure and they forced me to have it. There are some things that I can't say I love about being autistic. The fact that it takes me 2 hours to pick out an outfit, not because of how it looks, because I have to feel it to make sure that texture is going to be bearable to wear today. That wouldn't be a problem. However, you would also take away my gifts. You'd take away my ability to memorize very, very quickly, which is why I sailed through college while raising 5 kids. You would take away my ability to see music. I see color when I hear music, and it's like constant artwork for me. You take away my ability to do my job. I love patterns, which makes being a data scientist the best job in the world for me. And if I tried to explain to any of you exactly what I do, I'd have you all asleep within 2 minutes. So trust me, you want me doing my job because you don't want to. You would take away my personality. You can't change someone's brain and have them be the same person. You can't take away my autism and have me be the same because I am my autism. So maybe you're thinking, what can you do about this? How can you do anything about it? Especially if you're not autistic, you don't know anyone who is other than me. Well, there's a lot that can be done. First, we need to start looking at the positives. The focus has always been on the negatives, how it's negatively affecting people. There are a lot of positives, too, with autism. For example, most people that are autistic have what we call our special interests. These start very, very young. By the time they hit adulthood, they've become subject matter experts in them. And frequently they're in areas such as science and math. You cannot tell me we don't need more subject matter experts in those areas. They look at things in a unique way. You can't rewire someone's brain and have them look at things the same way as everyone else. That unique perspective could change everything. Most people with autism have unique talents for the same reason. You can't change the brain around and have it be the same as everybody else. Look at Dan Aykroyd's talents, Tim Burton's talents. Those were because of their autism, not in spite of it. Which leads to the second point. Don't accept someone despite the fact they're autistic. Perfect example of this is actually Einstein, who has been diagnosed posthumously, I can never say that word. He's been diagnosed since after death by a team of psychologists who looked at the history and went, oh yeah. So his whole life he was rejected because he spoke very late, very, very late talker, did very poorly in school, had no social skills whatsoever, and then suddenly he's developing, different formulas, mathematics, etc., and people realize he's a genius. One of those people was the Queen of England, who also knew that Einstein was an amazing musician, which most people don't know that. So she invited him to come to England to play a duet with her on his violin. So he goes, and they're playing, and they're in the middle of a concert hall, surrounded by all these people, all dressed up in their finest. In the middle of the performance, he stops playing, stands up, walks over to the Queen, says, "You play too loud," and leaves. Everybody laughed. But if you really think about it, had he done that before he was famous, he probably would have been arrested, maybe executed. I'm not real sure how England does things. But it wouldn't have gone over well for him. But they were willing to overlook it because he was famous. They would overlook his autism, which they didn't know what it was at the time, but they'd overlook his difference. The problem with that is it was his difference that made him develop what he did in the first place, which leads to the third point. Don't make people prove their value to you before you'll accept them. Tim Burton once said at a recent gala in his honor for the work that he's done, he still isn't accepted. People love his work, but they don't know him. They've never known him, and they never will, because all they care about is what he's done for them. We should be accepting people because they're human beings and they have the right to be accepted. Finally, there are difficult symptoms with autism, and we need to treat them as fairly as we do other disabilities. When I started at my new dream job, which I'm still there, still my dream job, there was a meeting about the fact that they're going open concept in the entire company. Immediate nightmare for me. And my first thought was, what about people who are autistic? So I asked her after the meeting, I said to her, what kind of supports are going to be put in place for people who are on the spectrum? Now, I will say she didn't know I was, which is why her answer is why she still doesn't know that I was. She looked at me and said, if someone with autism were even capable of working here, we could give them a white noise machine or something, or they could work from home. I was really hurt by that answer. And of course didn't tell her, hey, by the way, now I would. Back then, no. I felt like I was being punished because I was different. I want to work in the office because we all know, first of all, that's how you move your career up, is interacting with people. And second of all, although I do need breaks from people, I like people. I wanted to be around my colleagues. But I couldn't because that would have been torture. If I was in a wheelchair, she wouldn't have said to me, we're not building you a ramp. You either walk up the stairs or you can't come to work. So we need to be aware that there are things we can do to help people who are autistic so they can be with us too, and that their pain or their issues are just as valid. Autism, though, is not just problems, it's solutions too. Look at what people such as Tim Burton and Dan Aykroyd, Einstein, Steve Jobs, who has admitted that he was on the spectrum as well, and many, 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 many more have done for the world because their brain works differently. Think about what the kids growing up right now, or maybe even the person sitting next to you, could do if neurodiversity acceptance was the norm. Thank you.